And we're live. All right. So I'm joined once again with perhaps one of the few people that makes me laugh as much as I do, Owen. We're going to be talking about the topic of call-out culture. Um, this is part two of what will probably be part four, depending on how many people end up going through with these conversations on the topic of call-out culture. Um, so I guess you can tell the audience how you're doing, and then we can get into like our definitions of call-out culture.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, firstly, I'm doing fine. It's an honor to be here once again, S-Man. On your second channel, I noticed.
Yeah, the strike will expire on the 15th of November. Thank God. But it does suck having to try and export these so much.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, YouTube's upload system is a bit of a nightmare at the best of times. So,
yeah, in your country, it's probably going to get a little worse. So I do greatly sympathize.
Oh, was this regarding the new rules?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not probably going to get worse for me because, like, I mean, my content's hardly that big or professional. So, I mean, I'll be fine. So,
Yeah,
maybe I'll fill the vacuum of disgruntled YouTubers.
That's Owen's own strategy, guys. All right, so, all right, hello, Geek. Geek's already in the chat. So I guess to start this off, I guess background is, for my definition of call-out culture, it's the normalization of taking just a bit of contention, a contentious issue, or just some little spat, right? And instead of people just dealing with that in private, it's the first approach is to take it out to be public. So I'm just going to make up an example here just to kind of clarify what I'm saying. So let's say me and Owen had a problem, right? And I was like, Owen, I don't get why you like anime. I just don't get it. So instead of just talking about this in private, right, like anyone else would, I would write a tweet saying, @OwenMcDonald8 likes X, therefore Owen's bad. And, instead of taking the proper approach where it's like, and it could be whether it could be serious or somewhat trivial, the better approach is to take it in private. And I wouldn't even recommend DMs. I mean, like an off-air hangout to be like, so this is my problem. You like anime in general. You like pineapples. Like, that's just no bueno. But, it would be much better to deal with than in public. But so basically my definition is the normalization of starting drama, and you tag the person in the post or even subtweeting. But it's just this idea that, the normalization of handling it in public versus handling it in private.
Okay. So, like you said, the idea that problems should be dealt with more in the immediate circle and stuff, rather than necessarily for the world to see, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a little bit of a different stance. I mean, I don't really see call-out culture as a thing per se. I can understand where you're coming from, like with the idea that, because there are definitely some people who see any opportunity with any sort of disagreement to take it into, this person is bad, go and attack them, go and be bad to them. And certainly, if it was the scenario you're doing, and if someone liked anime and then someone else is like, oh wow, what a scumbag, that's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But whether I would call this a culture as such, I probably wouldn't use that terminology for it. It's maybe it's jumping the gun a little bit. It's being too presumptuous, and maybe with some issues it can be better and more beneficial to just focus within the group. Say to someone, oh look, what you're saying is a bit harmful. What you're saying is not right. Maybe think about that some more. And certainly with something like anime or any other non, just a minor thing, that's something you don't need to be grilling people over. Like, oh, my favorite film is Transformers. You're not going to see someone say like, oh, I mean, that's an example. My film isn't literally Transformers, but if it was, it would be silly for someone to be like, oh, @OwenMcDonald, what a scumbag, Transformers, he's got such poor taste. that'd be ridiculous.
Mm.
But where I feel the term, or what I feel this conversation is sort of leading to, is the idea with more politically, orientated stuff. I would imagine, and that sort of stuff, I don't see. I don't necessarily see quote unquote call outs as a necessarily negative thing. I think in in terms of depending on what the thing is. I mean, like you said, there's talking to people within their circles and stuff, and there's definitely it's productive to have talk to people off air or offline or just in private DMs or whatever about something they've said. However, at the same time, lots of people are they're posting stuff in public, and they're posting stuff for the world to see. And in a way, it's important that stuff is still criticized. And obviously, there's a limit, there's a line. I'm not talking about one person uttering a word and then suddenly everyone's like, oh, this person, get the noose, to string them up. Obviously, but at the same time, there has to be. It's important for people to be criticized when they do things that are wrong, and especially when they persist in doing things in a harmful nature. And I'm not talking, I obviously save it for when it's important. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that is harmful, and it's important to criticize it. Anyway, can you go ahead?
All right. So if it's something you said in public, I still think that taking it in private, depending on what it is, of course, is important. Now, I'll make up another example. This time it will be a more serious one. So let's say I saw Owen pull a complete 180 from the Owen I know most of the time. He posts his usual opinions, and I saw a massive change in instead of making posts against fascism, he's starting to make fascist sympathies, and it's if I talk to him in private, and he's completely, going towards fascism. Or if he was being if he was being an abusive person, right? I think at that point it's probably a good idea to let people know. Or if he's doing something, I mean, it really depends on what it is. If he was doing something illegal, privately talking to him about it is pretty much, I would rule that out entirely. If he was doing something illegal, then a public call out I would see as definitely justified. Now, when it's just a squabble or something trivial, I would say it's much better to deal with it in private. I don't think people really like having their character flaws pointed out in public. I think that's going to get a more confrontational side of them. It's going to get a more heated, defensive person. So, let's say Owen had some character flaw and I was pointing that out in public. If I got an angry version of him, if I got a belligerent response from him, I couldn't really blame him, considering that's one of the few things I'm pretty sure a lot of people on here could agree. They don't necessarily like having that all out in public. When it comes to something someone says in public, I still think it is generally helpful to take it out in private, because sometimes it could be literally a misunderstanding. I'll use a real example. So there was a post I had made, or I had shared, about immigration, and a leftist wanted to talk to me in private about it because they were confused and they weren't sure exactly what were my intentions. We went into an off-air hangout. We talked about it. We clarified it. No problem. It is important to sometimes to be as strategic and decisive with how you want to approach things, because the approach will signify, or at least in my opinion, it really does paint the portrait of how critical one thinks before they act.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with some of that, and like you said, the person who spoke to you about immigration and stuff, that stuff is good. I think that obviously when people want to have the conversation, that can be more productive done just face to face, just the two of you able to talk and stuff about the relevant thing.
Yeah.
And like you said, if someone's being personally attacking and stuff, just pointing out, oh, S-Man, you did X, Y, Z. I didn't like it. You're bad. Obviously, yeah, like you said, that's going to get a negative reaction out of someone. And with some character flaws, yeah, it's silly to just sort of rail against that. Like if I were to say that, oh, this person, they're pedantic, they're stroppy and stuff, that's not going to get any positive response. That's just me listing off things I don't like about a person. However,
Hmm.
some character flaws are more serious than just, oh, they're a bit nitpicky. They've got personal gripes that I don't particularly like. Some character flaws are more of a problem because they're actively harmful. So, for instance, bigotry. If someone is repeatedly harmful, and posting stuff that is not only hurtful but aggressive towards certain people, that's something that should be alerted. People should be alerted to. And obviously, if it's like they've said one thing and you've not given them a chance to sort of either learn from it or explain themselves or whatever, then yeah, fair enough. It's important to, it's good to try and talk to them first. But at the same time, I feel as though some people, you can't blame people for speaking about bigots when their bigotry is so pervasive and in their face. So if there's someone who's posting hateful, let me think of an example, like homophobic stuff. If someone's posting loads of stuff that's using slurs, trying to call them degenerate or whatever, loads of hateful, obviously bad language and stuff, then it comes to a point where not only should they expect to be criticized, but it makes more sense to alert people, because it's like why would you want to interact with someone who's spreading this hate and stuff? Why would you want to have this person in your circles when they're posting abusive stuff? And obviously it's important, like if they've just used a slur or something then once or something, it's in that then would be a good time to say, hey, take them aside and say, hey, it's not okay to say this. This slur obviously isn't good. And then if the onus is on them to either improve their behavior, and then they won't have people sort of criticizing them like in private, or they don't improve their behavior, but then they're going to have people probably speak about them, because what I would expect to have, if I started posting homophobic stuff, I would expect like my followers and stuff and you and everyone to be saying, oh, Owen's being homophobic.
Yeah,
It's
you got that promise.
The onus is on the person who's been criticized to try and improve. And like you said, reaching out to them privately is beneficial to some degree and with some incidences to a certain level. However, when it becomes persistent, when it's a repeated problem, then it becomes effective and important to criticize them publicly. And especially because you're one person who's reached out to them, other people are going to see this stuff as well. It's a public sphere, and they're going to criticize them regardless of whether you reached out to them privately or not.
I also forgot to mention why I would discourage just DMs is it because sometimes, and you and I have spoken about this before, like text can come off multiple ways to multiple different people. Voice, like what we're doing right now, no one can honestly say Owen and S-Man are screaming their heads off at each other. Like, no, we're just talking like two normal people. People can understand your tone in voice versus text. They can understand if you're being sarcastic, if you're angry. And coming back to what you said regarding if it happens just once, or if it happens multiple times, I'd say it should be like a one or a 2 or 3 strike thing. Like strike one, like if I saw Owen posting things where he's like making apologisms for conversion therapy, I'd pull him aside and ask him if he's trolling or if he's being serious. And if it happened a second time, I'd pull him aside again and ask him what is his problem. If it happened a third time, I'd probably quote his tweet like I do 1,000 of his and say, okay, this is absolute garbage. Like, why would you even say that about gay people? Like, come on. But, I mean, yeah, there's certain things where calling him out, talking to them in privately is probably not going to work. And publicly quoting their tweet is fine. But yeah, sure, you are one person if you pull them aside in private, but I think that everyone, whether it be on left Twitter or right Twitter or even centrist Twitter or whatever, you know, should take their grievances in private before it blows up into this massive controversy that it shouldn't be. Like, I mean, me and Owen have dealt with our various uh, dramas, whatever you want to call it, throughout 2018. It's been a drama-filled year. Um, and one notable one started in public. So if the incident starts in public, then it's not a big deal if you talk about something that happened in public. Um, that notable incident of the guy who shall not be named on your channel with him and his friends, that happened in public. Like, your fans were in the chat saying, "Wow, that was pretty bad that you got insulted on your own channel like that." Something publicly happening like that. Yeah, I don't see a problem with calling that person out. Like, everyone literally saw it. Incidents that happen in private, like if someone's espousing bigoted views in the in Twitter chats, I can see, sometimes if it's like, imagine if we were dealing with a race realist, and if I was in your shoes, I probably wouldn't want to talk to them, or I would say, like, what do you mean by X, Y, Z, or whatever they said. Then it gets into the interesting part of the area of showing DMs, because that can be considered a call out. But I don't know. I'd be rambling on. I'll let you go ahead.
No problem. So I think there's levels of which to which a call out or a criticism in public is justified. So like you said, if someone's putting in eugenic stuff in the chat and putting obviously stuff they really ought not to know is rubbish, that's worthy of being criticized. If someone's putting in things saying, oh, black people are subhuman and stuff, I've got some evidence to show it. It's like that's the sort of thing that makes me want to say, okay, this person's some Nazi. Let's tell people that, oh, this person isn't good. If it's someone who instead is doing something that's maybe they're saying what's it called? Trying to think, mind blank. If they're saying like a word that might be that it's got problem, it's not a good word to say, then that's the sort of thing that maybe if they say it once or twice, you can say, oh, don't say that, it's racist or it's sexist or whatever. Though even then, the strength of the word is important. So if it's a word that can be construed as a slur and has been used as a slur and stuff, then that's one thing. If it's like an obviously offensive word, then that's something that they ought to know about. And that's for me, that's like a don't use this word one time, and then if they're not listening post that, then the the rain is lifted. You can like go to town of sorts. But at the same time, the patience people have is always going to vary. In many ways, it shouldn't just be a one rule fits all. If someone has a tendency to say bigoted things, and not really care about the consequences of their language, then that's the sort of scenario where it's like, well, you've had your chance, you've been told repeatedly, why waste my time trying to speak to someone who isn't gonna, come to terms with it. But if it's someone who, they've not been told before, they've not, heard it before, they say it, and then you can, have a justification in pointing it out to them and maybe like giving them a bit more patience. I think it's also important to remember that the feelings of a person who's said said or done the bad thing shouldn't come over the status and being of those affected by the word and those who the word is targeted at, if that makes sense. So, if someone's saying bigoted stuff, then, by all means, it's good to take them aside and explain to them why. But my priority is the person the bigoted word is aimed at. I'm not gonna be in a situation where I'm catering to someone who's harmed other people than to people who've been the target of this of abuse and stuff, of foul language and derogatory remarks and stuff. it's important to help people re-understand, understand why things are bad, but it's also important to stop the bad things from harming those affected by it, if that makes sense.
No, it does. An example, you just reminded me of an example. You and I were both having a talk about at one point a couple months back about words and like how to handle those who say those words. The transphobic slur trap that we had to talk with someone about. It spilled out into the public. Me and Owen were just overseeing this happen. We didn't post screen caps, but someone else had. So the word was used in a chat. Someone said that is transphobic. Stop. Like, the person didn't agree that it was. I mean, if the person does not agree that the word is, like, for instance, if I was to use that word, in the context of calling somebody that, and you pull me aside and you say, you realize what that means, right? Or could you please just knock it off? Like, pulling someone aside in that case, like, yeah, like what you said, if they don't know, then in that case it's fine. But I will say this: if someone like calls another person that, while I wouldn't recommend posting screen caps, I see it like this: if you don't want that person to post the screen caps, just don't say it to begin with. So, like, let's say let's say me and Owen got into a heated argument, right? And he says, "S man, kill yourself." I would definitely post a screen cap of that, and I wouldn't regret that. Or if I called Owen a racial slur, or if I called him a biphobic slur, the choice is ultimately his. It's half his conversation too. But I will say though that in certain contexts, there's certain things that happen where it's like I don't see the overall benefit. Like, when people don't know the context of the situation, they don't know anyone who's involved, or they're not going to look at it from let's look at everything objectively from start to finish, so we know what's going on. They'll look at it from one point of view and one point of view only, and it causes the situation to blow up more than it should have. That incident on your channel, I think it's almost a universal consensus that it didn't have to blow up the way it did. And throughout that whole thing, it started in public, it was brought into private, then it was brought back into public. So the idea of trying not to engage in call-out culture, and I'll explain why I use the word culture in a second. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm pretty sure there are exceptions to the rule. Definite exceptions to the rules, like doxing, threats, like absolute harassment, bullying, spam. Yeah, those things I would say are the exceptions to the rule of you don't need to participate in that call-out culture. Now, you said earlier you didn't agree with or at least you didn't, you had a different stance from using the term culture. The reason I would use the word culture is, and I'm not trying to make any generalizations here, but when it comes to left Twitter, from what I've seen, it does appear that way. Right Twitter is just as guilty sometimes, although they're generally more focused on posting about economics and Donald Trump. But and centrist Twitter's too busy being stuck in the center to go in any of those directions. But I do see it as like, it might be a narrow majority or even a plurality of left Twitter might engage into it, whether to a heavy or light extent. But I do see it as, I guess it does depend on what it is. Like, that one notable incident where you got called a racial slur. Well, I don't think I would have posted screen caps of it. I would have definitely had taken screen caps, and I would have probably said, if you keep calling me this, I'm going to post it all over, all over Twitter if you don't stop. And if they have a problem with it, then it's almost like a bargaining tool. Hey, you stop calling me this, I won't post the screen caps. And if they continue, then you gave them a warning. But it does depend on the controversy and Yeah, I'm sorry. Just I saw the
Something in the
chat.
chat?
Yeah, Lapis says hashtag civility is the fetish of centrist Twitter.
Wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
As the horrible person Paul Joseph Watson likes to say, imagine my shock.
um,
But yeah.
to reply to what a lot of what you said, firstly, on a slight note, the person who did call me the racial slur did do so numerous times. And though I didn't actually say, I'll post this to public. I just sort of did it anyway. But they clearly crossed the line. I don't have any remorse, regret for making that public. Having said that, you said something which was very correct, which is that it's if you say offensive, hateful stuff to someone, it's half their conversation as well. They have every right to just do what they want with it. Namely, if they want to post it public. If you didn't want it in public, then you shouldn't have sent the abusive stuff. Just like with anything, if you don't want people to say, "Oh, you said this," then don't say it. And while you can extend patience to people, at the same time, some people have to realize that their actions have consequences, and that's actually what I've written here. Actions have consequences. If you go around saying stuff and making no effort to sort of learn, especially when it's obvious stuff like is the N-word racist, that's something you should know from a very young age, then don't be surprised when people talk about it. If you're going to complain, oh, people called me out in public, it's like, well, you said stuff that was horrible. Why are you surprised? Even like on a basic level, it's like at schools, kids are told that that people aren't going to want to play with them if they're not a nice person. And it's a similar concept here. If you do bad things, then people aren't going to speak about you in a positive light. Coming on to what you said about left Twitter and stuff. I mean, that's another thing I find a little bit too generalized, like left Twitter, because the left wing ideas, and left wing people, they're along a spectrum. There's a lot of numerous different facets and elements to it, and different thoughts across the board. There's people who are a bit more liberal, like to use someone in our circles, for instance, Hawke. I wouldn't, we are both left wing, but I wouldn't describe him as firstly as left wing as me by any means, and secondly as in the same circles and stuff. There's people who like to defend who align themselves with like the Soviet Union and stuff. They're not the same left wing sort of person as you. There's people who are happy to sort of disregard the intersectionality that I would consider vital to left wing thought. There's all sorts of different standards and ideas left wing people have, and to sort of lump them all into left Twitter, I find to be a little bit reductive and futile in a way, because it's like you're addressing quite a lot of people with different attitudes and approaches. Like, for instance, I would regard like I've said, I think it's important to hold people to account and criticize them when they do bad things, to a degree, obviously. But other people would, maybe not think. Other people might say, "Oh, DMs are private; you never post them." Some people, don't even have time for, any sort of patience. Like, oh, if you say something, I'm going to post it straight away. People who, some people do cross a line by sort of looking for any little thing they've got wrong and like sort of jumping on it straight away. There is obviously a limit, but at the same time, the idea that it's all sort of left Twitter call out culture is prevalent on left Twitter. I don't think it serves much purpose, because it's a little bit it's too vague, it's too generalized. Yeah.
All right. When I say left Twitter, like generally, whether you're center left, moderately left, or far left, and I mean, no, I understand the confusion. Like, yes, it is true there are different echelons of left Twitter, right Twitter. When you got the anarcho-capitalists, like the far right, the moderate right, and the center right, and then you got the dead center for center's Twitter, center left, moderate left, far left. But I would say that whether or not you are of the intersectional type or the really far left type or whatever, the sock dem territory, and I'm not trying to sound like a partisan hack or like I'm just this right winger trying to criticize left Twitter. I try not to use the term leftist when I'm talking about any group of people, just to be on the fair side of things. But when it does come to left Twitter, you do, and usually whenever I would see these individuals, and there's plenty out there, I would go to their bio because I don't want to assume that they are a part of left Twitter. I want to make sure for certain that they are self-identified left wing or self-identified X, or if I see them repost a lot of political opinions of this certain faction or echelon on this side of the left or the right or the center, that to me is a good sign of where they stand. Although people will put the retweets and likes don't equal endorsements, but I want to point out about patience. Yeah, patience is something that it varies on the person. You're a rather patient guy. I mean, there are certain things you have zero patience for, and I understand that. And in a few areas, I strongly agree. I'm not as patient as you if people have not been able to tell, but it is something I do work on. But I do think that we should try and encourage people to reconsider how they handle certain controversies, because I will say that if it's some just drama, like, oh my God, Becky said this or whatever, I don't really think public Twitter is going to care all that much. If someone threatened to dox you, was being very verbally abusive, I mean, at least I hope, but people would care and say, yeah, that's wrong. But when it comes to DMs and everything, like, if it's something you would never ever want said in public, you probably shouldn't post it in private where that's the chance. Because you and I have talked about things that in my policy with everybody is it's they don't have to tell me, but unless they say to me, you can say this publicly, I'm going to take it to the grave. Heck, you can tell me what you had for breakfast, but it's like I want to be consistent with the idea that unless someone says to me, I don't care if you say this publicly, then I'm going to take it to the grave, unless it's something criminal, whether or not it's something that proves you've committed a crime, or whether or not you're conspiring to commit things like doxing. I will definitely break my own rule if someone is saying is like being verbally abusive towards me. And I don't blame people for having a short fuse, if you will, when it comes to how people act towards them. I've argued with people who are private DM absolutists, if that's a new type of way of thinking, who will make arguments and comparisons to other things to try and say, by that logic, you're saying this. I do have a very nuclear take as an example of the private DM absolutists, but it's rather nuclear, but nonetheless, it just, I don't know, it just, from seeing how things have gone this year with some of our circles, and seeing the kind of controversies and drama that's been, that's boiled over, and the public seeing this, and they don't know half of the context of the situation. I mean, Twitter, I don't think is the best place, because that imagine all this controversy, all this drama in this water tower, right? And you got Twitter, where you got the replies, the retweets, and everything, and where people can send it into other DMs. So by putting out in public on at least Twitter, Imagine it's the what this four-legged water tower, and one of the legs that's very pivotal to it standing up just collapses over and just floods everyone's feed, and you know only 280 characters a tweet, and you can only put so many tweets in one thread. And I've learned this myself, but usually it's like throughout that, uh, like there's only you can only fit so many words in a tweet to explain everything without going on this massive thread that's like enough to fill a John Grisham novel. So it's like Twitter, I think, is one of the worst places to hash things out. I think if you must put this in public, I'd say a video is way better to explain what's going on, whether it be in a hangout, or just a simple video. I mean, I've had to do this a few times. Most recently, September, to explain a whole lot of issues regarding one particular controversy we all got involved in. I don't think a Twitter thread would have worked. So I guess this could boil down to differences of handling it. Like, I would ask everyone to, on a case by case basis, look at a situation and think, okay, is this the way I want to handle this? Because it's a bell you cannot unring, or it's a yeah, I think that's the best way to put it, is a bell you can't unring.
Yeah, so that's a good saying, actually.
I heard it back in 2014. I don't remember who said it, but whoever said it was genius. Like, I'll even pull up a serious example that's, of course, a fictitious one. So, let's say I made a tweet thread, saying Callout culture is bad. And let's say Owen thought I was talking about him behind his back. So he pulls me aside and he says, okay, I saw your thread, or if I made a video and he thinks I'm talking about him, and if he says, okay, I saw your video or I saw your thread, are you talking about me? If we talked about that in private or even in the replies, because generally replies don't go into people's feeds. It's almost like a semi-private type of thing. So if he just says, hey, am I causing any problems? That to me is the much healthier way of dealing with it, because it does, when you go out in public, it does fan the flames a little bit. Like, it's like a fire, and instead of throwing water or even dirt on the fire, and that could be the equivalent of going in private, going out in public with it just fans the flames further, and it gets everyone burned in the end.
Yeah, well, I can see where you're coming from with a lot of that. What shall I talk about this in reply? Trying to think. I should start with that, actually. Well, yeah, no, it's with subtweets. I feel as though if something is, if something appears subjective, it's not like, if it's not certain what's being said, and yeah, that's important to sort of speak to, one-on-one, just directly, sort of, oh, what did you mean by this? That way it's nice and easy, and like you said, it can put out a conflict before it even starts, rather than sort of escalating it to a bigger thing. So if for whatever reason that situation did occur, and I did feel as though I was being criticized in a duplicitous way, I could just go to you and ask, oh, well, is this what you meant, or whatever. That's a good way to say it. However, with some stuff, so not everything is going to be so specific and so subtextual and stuff. Some stuff, or certainly the stuff that I would feel I'd be talking about on my social media, would be more direct. It'd be more, it'd be, oh, this is an obviously bad thing. The times I have posted, screenshots and screen caps, it's always been, pretty, vile, vulgar, obvious stuff. It's never been like, oh, I think this person is speaking at me, so I'm going to use my platform to go against them. It's been, this person is being blatantly racist. This person is saying, disgusting things. This person is actively, harmful and dangerous for people who get upset about that stuff, because I've got followers that I don't want to be having negative feelings by the sort of people that are around me and stuff. What kind of person would I be if I wasn't looking out for, the other people, in my circles. Um, so the example you gave, yeah, definitely, I'd be going to you first rather than just sort of saying, how dare you speak about me, you cretin or whatever. um,
I'd also like to just clarify on that point, because especially if there's a misunderstanding, like if you're trying to get some clarification of what someone means or says, because you know, imagine you're in a situation where you think someone's talking about you, and you go in this public tirade for however long it lasts, and then you find out, oh wait, this person was not speaking about me at all, and look at all what just happened. It'd be really embarrassing. So I think it's beneficial to both parties, or one of multiple, or however many are involved, to handle that in private hangouts rather than. I mean, if they are not the type to enter a hangout, then I just ask them to just ask them. I guess it'd just be a lengthy DM conversation.
yeah, but yeah, exactly.
So what was the second point you wanted to make?
Uh, I've got controversies written down here, but I'm trying to remember what it was about. It was about the ones that we've had in our circles. So with them, like I can understand, how, like you said earlier, people don't like being criticized in public, and therefore sometimes can become irate or angry. um, yeah, it could be yeah, anyone can be caught in a moment of frustration and subsequently say stuff that is either extreme or exaggerated or whatever. But that I feel as though sometimes things, it's important to say stuff in a way that's more direct, because sometimes, as you said earlier, patience can only go so far, and there's no point just always giving people benefit of the doubt and giving people extra time when they're clearly not learning from it and not taking it. And certainly with me, I feel as though I'm not going to go out of my way to like find something like, oh, this person, we need to go and cramp down on them. But if someone is directly, consistently saying stuff to me, or directly engaging with me in conversation in public and saying the stuff, I feel that it's fully justified. It's talking about them and talking about the things they're saying. And I wouldn't call that, personal attacks or smears or anything. I would call that just, criticizing stuff said in public that's, that's substantive. Because I think a lot of the time people tend to confuse substantive criticism with like, just personal attacks. Because, I'm not saying, oh, John, I hate your guts, you're a bad guy. Like, if John was to be criticized, I'd be saying like, oh, John said something racist. John has been consistently abusive. John, things that are actually negative and harmful, rather than just I've got a personal grudge against them. And it's never just like a one-off thing. It's always in tandem with other stuff as well. It's always substantive, and not only that, but I try to like make my posts more critical and analytical. So I won't just post, oh, John is bad. It will be this person, John, is representative of racist behavior, or has done something that signifies the importance of eradicating bigotry or whatever. But it's always for me, it's about making it larger than just the bigot, making it about the bigotry and how it's important to tackle it and stuff. And obviously in the process of that, then the bigot is highlighted as a bigot, but that's a given, really. Like as we said earlier, if they didn't want to be called that, then maybe don't go around calling people slurs and then getting upset when someone decides to talk about it.
I will say that number one, I've always found it fascinating when you come up with all these names. You could probably be a movie writer, but yeah, no, I completely agree. I compare patience with empathy all the time in terms of like there's no such thing. Yeah, there's no such thing as an infinite amount of patience. You know, there's some people who have the patience of a saint. You know, who you could scream in their face, you could say some of the most hateful, abusive things towards them, and they're stoic. They're acting as if you're not even there. And then there are some people you could just simply insult them, and they are up in your face. It's close. It's up close and personal. That's why, and with people that might be kind of a pain in the neck, it's important to teach people from a young age. Patience is like water. It's not. It's not. It is a finite thing. You know. It's a finite thing with me, and it is with you, and it is with all human beings. Everyone has their breaking point. It's just where it is the mystery, and people usually shouldn't want to find out. So I'll say this, that you know the reason I wanted to talk to people about what I call cult culture is I just saw it as something that could be potentially very toxic. It could be something where it makes people involved in the circles get tired of whoever's participating in it. It will make people think that, you know if you're not clear with what your standards are for when you do it publicly, that, I could say the littlest of things and this person's going to potentially send their fans after me, because sometimes a public call out, I'm not saying you have to say to people don't harass them. I'm not going to be like, you should write this like secondary threat saying, now I'm not saying you should go and attack someone. No, I mean, hopefully the fans are switched on enough to understand that without you having to say it. There's certain things that shouldn't have to be said, but we live on planet Earth, and that's not always the case. But with various things, there are certain times where a public call out is, like I said earlier, is completely warranted. Like that one. I'll just put it like this, but we're not gonna use names here. But that one public funding thing we all got scammed into, publicly calling that out is perfectly justified. Sometimes I do think, though, that it should be organized in private, in the sense that you have all your information together. Like you saw my video description where I had all the sources I could link and more.
Yeah.
So people understand that you're not pulling some Joe McCarthy of just making accusations, or saying someone believes this or has said this without concrete evidence. In some of your callouts, there's no denying. I don't think you Photoshop anything.
I mean, I wouldn't know how, S-Man. So
I know how, but it's too. I'm not that good at it. But generally, there's no denying that someone called you that racial slur, or someone said they have done X in the military, or whatever. Like, I mean, usually it's hard to fake that, and even then, that other person has the other side of the conversation. So if they were able to say, yeah, you faked that conversation, here's my side of the DMs, then there's a little interesting thing, though. I almost forgot to bring up, is group chats. I did speak to someone about this once, and they were saying that they were of the belief that if you're going to show public DMs, the owner of the chat, or the admin, should be asked, because it is their chat. There are certain cases where I own one of the more infamous chats of our circles. There are certain cases where, I would definitely allow DMs to be shown publicly. It would depend on what the context is and the intent behind it, and that's where my standards would be: the context, the intent behind it, and how long would this drag out? Because I'm not wanting it to drag out like an Iraq war. I want it to have a quick, conclusive end, instead of it dragging on for the next couple of months to over a year.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, it's about the context and stuff. If if it's a group chat and people are wanting to if they're discussing something, and it's there's nuance to it, and there's an effort to like actually sort of go somewhere with the conversation and stuff, and it's natural conversation. It's two people actually wanting to talk and maybe just saying things that could be improved upon. Then yeah, that's the sort of thing that is perfectly reasonable to keep within the circle, and definitely check with the people running the group chat first. But at the same time, I would argue that it's possible for some admins or some people on top of stuff to be part of the issue. So if like say an admin was saying some of the biggest stuff, I'm not gonna then like that admin's not gonna see it as an issue. So why would I check with them to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna post this publicly. Do you mind? It's like especially with group chats because it's different because well actually well no it's it's still a lot of the same rules apply. Obviously I'm not gonna like I'm gonna try and speak and I'm gonna try and converse because like you said I try and be quite patient. I feel as though I do make efforts to speak to those who are in disagreement, but there's a limit. There's got to be a a line to that can be crossed, and subsequently when things happen that require to criticism or whatever, if time has elapsed and it's still going on, nothing's been done about it, and maybe not enough people are saying anything, then I feel justified in using it as a criticism, and especially like I said, I try and make my critiques much more more than just person X is bad. I try and use the full 280 characters. I try I try and make more than just person X is bad for my for person reading it to actually read, because a tweet is a medium. Something you said earlier actually was that YouTube and Twitter. You said that Twitter isn't always the best place to do this sort of thing. And your videos that you make, like about the public funding scam, that was obviously really informative and good, and that's a very good way of showing it. However, different people have different formats and stuff, and the speed certainly. I find it much easier to make a tweet than to make a video. Partly because I don't edit my videos at all, but also just because it's a lot quicker. It doesn't take as much time for me at least, to say X, Y, Z, and give reasons and stuff, rather than sort of spend time thinking about a video and stuff, and especially when sometimes the point just needs to be bigotry when unchallenged can lead to obviously abusive behavior and stuff. But yeah, that's what I want to say.
What do you mean by like different speeds? Because like with tweets, go ahead.
So with tweets, with a screen cap, all I have to do is take the screenshot, crop it so it doesn't look massive, write a little bit next to it, which is I don't find that very hard, and then it's done, it's posted. However, a video, I mean, it's certainly for me, you got to film it, you got to record audio, you got to put it together, wait for it to upload onto YouTube, make sure everything you want to say is there. I personally find it much easier to write tweets and to write in general than to make videos. I mean, I like speaking. I can speak fine about stuff, but actually putting that onto YouTube as like a proper video, a coherent package, that's the issue. Which is why most of my videos are like 5 minutes, because I don't edit stuff. I have to just speak off the cuff. I don't script my videos either. So for me, and obviously I'm not the only person, tweeting about it is easier. And plus, on Twitter, it can reach people more directly. For a video, you have to sort of sit down and watch it sometimes. With my tweets, if you're on Twitter, you just see it in your timeline, and the point can be just made like that.
Yeah, with tweets, um, generally, the reason I did not make a Twitter thread is because one, I know I'd have to make like 4 or 5 with how much information I would have for an entire thing. And fun fact, everyone who knows what I'm talking about that video, it took 4 days. Mostly off the top of my head, I did not really script anything, which I was proud that I actually could pull that off. But nonetheless, with tweets, I think it's easier for people to cherry pick. To say, oh, and to be fair, I guess you can make the same point for a video, but there, then you could demand, oh, Owen said this about gender pronouns in this video. Well, Owen could say, all right, what timestamp? I want to hear my own words here. With a tweet, it's people could take it out of context fairly easily. With a video, it's a little harder to do, considering people will demand, I want to see the full clip. I want to hear this uninterrupted. With the tweet, you can see it uninterrupted. Although, people could, they could Photoshop, they could frame it, and framing is a very important thing when it comes to debates and discussions and how we handle these callouts. Because if I frame something one way, I don't know, I just heard something one way. In certain areas it can look one way, but if I frame it a little differently, it might look different in a completely different way. For instance, with a thread or with a video, people are seeing it from your point of view. That's why if you got something to prove it, like screen caps or whatever, people can see how your view is formed, and they can see that this is something more objective. But in general, framing is an important thing because just using certain words can be very descriptive. Like if I'm trying to use words to describe something as bad, I could say it's grotesque, demonstrable, it's a monstrosity, or I could say it's bad, it's not good. Simple words that anyone can pick up, but usually it depends on the like we said earlier, the intent and things like that. But generally, I find videos to be a better way to communicate it. So, if people are trying to argue against what I'm saying in a tweet, certain tones in the context could be not as bold-faced as a video where you hear my voice and you hear what I'm saying. And, I'm not limited to characters. I might be limited to how much space I have on this computer, but I also try to just keep it to a reasonable time. And in your case, I understand why you'd prefer Twitter. I don't think you've ever really edited any of your videos. You might edit a thumbnail. Some of them are just lovely memes in the making, but I mean, some of them are decent. But there's times where a tweet could be easy, but a video, it shows that this is something people do take seriously. It's not difficult for anyone with a Twitter account to write something in 280 characters. But to make a video that took 4 days, something that was something very important, I think it does show a little more effort than just any old tweet. And I find it much more convenient because what if you were doing a call out? Let's say there was an incident where you got called a racial slur, and let's say it was big, like you have so much information, you couldn't even fit it into an entire thread of 27 to 30 tweets, if I'm not mistaken. A video. If it's something massive, to me, when you're mentioning you got to film it, I think you also got to think about it. Is this worth my time? Like that original N-word controversy we got into earlier this year, I did not originally see it as worth making a video. When more details came out about it, then it was worth it. But the public funding scam was worth it from the get-go, considering the context of how deeply involved everybody was. If it's something that is going to affect a ton of people, oh yeah, definitely it's worth a video, or at minimum a thread. But if it doesn't really affect anybody, or if it's not something where it's having it could have real world consequences, then I would say it's probably not. But at the end of the day, throughout the entire conversation, I'm just going to say this to everybody. How you want to address these controversies you get yourselves into or you see is completely up to you. Me and Owen, with our different ways of handling it, we could advise you all day long, on whether it's this or anything else. People can be your advisor. They can say, this is how you handle these certain things. But at the end of the day, it's completely up to you. I could advise Owen and say, just carefully weigh what you want to call out, what you want to post publicly about people. I don't like subtweeting, as I don't think it is fair to the person. Like if I'm talking about somebody, I want them to understand, like them to be aware of it, so they can defend themselves. Because I feel like, imagine if I was talking about Owen behind his back, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is such a hypocrite. He wants to be in these chats, but then he derides these chats. Like if he saw me say that, he's like, "Are you talking about me?" I should at least, I mean, to be fair, that would be a low blow, whether or not I say it with his name in it or not. So I think that sometimes people should, I would recommend you be careful. But if you want to tag them to let them defend themselves, I say that's that's one way you can handle it. But of course, like you've said from the beginning, this is not a one size fits all. This can come down to just mere differences of opinion or philosophy on how to handle certain things. Some people say handle it this one extreme way, and others say would disagree and say we don't have to take such a confrontational approach. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. With subtweets, I think the only time, I think a lot of the time rather, they're done because they don't want people, or they feel people feel that if they directly sort of quote tweet or use someone's at, then they'll be the subject of harassment from like the fans of that person. So if it's like a person with like 50,000, 10,000 followers, then maybe they don't want to say like, oh, this person is being racist, because then suddenly they'll get quote tweeted, and then loads of people will say a lot of horrible things in the mentions. When it's and normally that's for like that's for more stark stuff. So when it's like that sort of thing, I can understand why that makes sense. Having said that though, at the same time, sometimes it's better to just be direct and say, could you, let's speak about this, let's talk about this, let's understand where the issue is. I think regarding videos and tweets and like different mediums, I think it's subjective. Different things take different amounts of effort and time and stuff, and time isn't the same as effort, because as anyone can tell you, sometimes things that may appear to be simple take a lot of emotional energy and take a lot of personal energy. Sometimes things that take a long time maybe might have been a breeze. It's different for each person, and I don't think it's of less value necessarily that something was posted on one platform compared to another. Obviously different, like you said, different scenarios have different required responses. Sometimes all it takes is a few tweets or a few screenshots. Other times it takes a proper account of things, a proper list of sources and and what's it called, links, like you did with that that video. It's it's all it's contextual. It's for goodness sake, there's notifications on my own computer. It takes you've got to use your head and think about what is the required response. Having said that, with some call outs, with some responses, people people need to like we've both said, people need to consider that they need to think about what they say if they don't want people to talk about it. Because whether it's a video or a tweet, a post, a video. I've already said video. Any of these things. If someone feels they need to speak about it, a lot of the time that's because they felt that things needed to happen, things need to be spoken about. And if that wasn't the case, then if they are being petty, then it's obviously that's not great, but then people will obviously see that and they will address that. If I were to post, Steven is bad because he wore a Nike jumper. Something like nonsensical. Something that didn't make any sense. Then yeah, if I'm posting that, then at the same time, people are gonna say, oh well, Owen seems a little bit unnecessary. But if I said, oh, Stephen is bad because he said a lot of racist stuff, he repeatedly is abusive and horrible, then people are going to be like, okay, well, now I see why this is being said. If that makes sense.
No, it does. But yeah, I mean, like there, yeah, I think it's a kind of an interesting point you made regarding effort and time. Like, I guess with some people that 42-minute video would have taken them weeks. In my case, it only took 4 days and some caffeine. In some people's cases, if they would have done that via a thread, it could have taken them even longer. Or if it was something like this is all they can think about, like this has affected them so much, like that public funding scam, like it affected them so much that they decided when I have that time, I'm going to push this project, whether it be a thread or a video, until I get it out. Which that's what I did. Like the reason it was out within days of me finding out about it was, I had all the information. I had medical, legal statistics. I had all sorts of evidence, things like that, whether it be circumstantial or concrete. Same could apply for a thread. If it does take time, whether it be for a thread or a video, it will take time. In the case of a thread, it probably would have taken just maybe even 48 hours, but for a video, it might take a little longer. I mean, it is subjective. I mean, I prefer Twitter when I'm wanting to get into those Twitter debates, or when I'm just wanting to talk in the DMs. But I do prefer YouTube when it comes to making any meaningful posts, whether it be about politics or any other of the many subjects I speak about and plan on speaking about. But it is subjective. There's no like right or wrong way. So it's like there's no real wrong answers to which platform to use. Twitter has its limits. YouTube doesn't really, but the issue of making like an actual video, to sit down and record it in any way, shape, or form, it does have its limits, but it does have its benefits. So I guess you could say, in one hand, YouTube would have more benefits, but the limits do balance it out at some point.
Yeah, well, exactly. People need to realize that, be it YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, it's the substance of what matters. It's what's being said, which is more important. Like you said, I don't really think I've got much more to add to that.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I will say though that if anyone ever does public callouts on, I thought you had said Facebook or something. If someone does public callouts on Facebook, that's probably the worst platform. If you got your relatives added on Facebook,
I've not used Facebook in a while.
I've not really either. I find that platform to be way too too stereotypical. Joseph Adams has put quite a bit in the chat. Is this the same Joe Adams you've debated and who wanted to debate me, but he never said what time or topic?
I think so, yeah. Though, having said that, it's a different... I don't know if it's a different account, or I don't know if it's just like he's changed his name. But he has posted a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, weird is one way of putting it.
Owen got his hand in the cookie jar.
What does that even mean? And then, and let's see the pillowcase.
Let's see the pillowcase. You guys are too serious about this shit. He might be drunk, Like, I mean, honestly, like, I wouldn't put it past him.
To be fair, when I saw your hangout with your first hangout, I thought the dude was baked. The second hangout, he appeared a little more sober, although I still wouldn't put it past him that he probably got a little more. It probably still baked. He says it's okay. So it's the blonde Joe Adams who sounded very high in one of the streams. I will say this: if I ever am high, if I ever join a hangout of yours off air before you go live, and you see that I'm high or drunk, which I'm not going to do that. But let's say I was, if I was that if I was that bad at having any critical judgment, just kick me out of the hangout or just leave. Like, I don't imagine that'd be a good idea, because some of the things have happened when we've had people who were drunk. Sometimes it's hard to tell if they are. Just piece of advice: people don't have drunk people in your streams, because then they get people like bearing involved, and it's just not a good idea.
No, it really isn't.
Yeah. But I was actually going to quickly come back to a point regarding, if you let someone know you are criticizing them. I will, and I think this is probably where we're going to definitely disagree, maybe, but I see it like, if you're not going to give the person at least the ability to defend themselves, like if I block somebody, I'm not going to tweet behind their back. Like, if I blocked you, or if I blocked Geek or anybody from any circles, that'd be the last I'd speak about them. Unless, of course, I saw that they were speaking about me. But then again, I generally don't look at the Twitters of the individuals I've blocked. But I would see it like, imagine, I actually have a real life example. When me and Hawk were arguing with Ian Miles Chung, one of the few people Owen cannot stand for the life of him, he kept it to the replies. I think it was in one of his tweets or so. Someone quote tweeted him, and he was involved in. I don't even remember what it was, but he kept it to the replies. He didn't quote tweet. I will say this though: if I do quote tweet somebody and they quote tweet me, a strategy I generally have is I will mute their followers, so it's only me and that person, so I can just focus on what they're saying. I've seen left wing Twitter users. They'll actually block the people from that person's audience. So literally only those two main people are able to argue. But I would say that if imagine if Owen quote tweeted PewDiePie, and let's say for some odd reason PewDiePie quote tweets Owen. And let's say they were going. I'm going to use an extreme example. Like they're saying a bunch of racist things, and it's just like a lot of stuff where you just ask why would you need to say that to another person. I'm not saying it would be Owen's fault, but generally that is a risk when it comes to if you do quote tweet somebody that massive. But I would just say, I would say just mute them. Like if I'm getting spammed, and I don't care how big the person's following is, if their followers are spamming me and they're not contributing anything meaningful, or it's like so overwhelming I cannot reply to every single one of them, I'll just start muting them. It's not censorship, it's not being against free speech, but it's just wanting to prioritize who I respond to, and I just did not mean to rip out my own earbuds, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think that like I said a second ago, and like you said just now, some people they've got massive audiences, they've got harmful ways of conducting themselves, and especially if they've been criticized for right-wing stuff, not right-wing stuff, sorry, bigoted stuff. I meant, sometimes I get my terms confused.
Was it a Freudian slip?
Like that's the sort of scenario where I would want, I find it important to, be cautious, and thus if they're not going to directly mention the person they're criticizing, it makes sense. I don't want people to be harassed, and therefore it makes sense for someone to, maybe block and then talk about them, or subtweet or whatever, because that can be important. It's important to make sure you're staying safe, to a degree, because a lot of these issues that get spoken about, they result in actual harm in real life. Like, for instance, transphobic abuse, homophobic abuse. The well-being of LGBTQ people, in this instance, can sometimes be affected by the harassment they face online, and thus, having a load of people come into someone's mentions and post a load of hateful stuff, that's not something that people should want to happen. And thus, I'd say it's fully justified sometimes for people to do that sort of thing. Again, it's all contextual. If it's something, really petty and silly, then yeah, obviously that would be silly to have behind someone's back. But a lot of the time, I don't think it is. I think it's serious stuff. It's a matter of self-care that sometimes blocks happen and stuff.
Yeah.
What was the other thing you said? I'm having a bit of mind blank. It's getting quite late. You said something else, and I can't remember what it was. But you go ahead. Reply to what I just said.
No, I sympathize. Usually, when I quote tweet someone with a large following, I think I at least once quote tweeted James Woods. I did so with other people that have a substantial following. Generally, they don't reply back. I don't know if it's just me, or if they just generally don't reply back to other people, but that's fine. The only time I've ever really had someone like with a massive following quote tweet me or reply to me was when I was discussing something political. I can't remember the person's name, but generally, like if their fans do reply back to me, usually it's like a couple. I don't know if any instances that I can name off the top of my head where I've seen someone with a tiny following just get dogpiled by this person's fans. I'm pretty sure there are definite examples. I just can't name any off the top of my head, but I would say that while fundamentally, I would definitely say you should at least let the person know who you're criticizing them, so they could at least defend themselves against your criticism, or they could say, "Okay, that was a fair point you made." But I would say that you could either keep it in the replies, and then there's some people who have their DMs open, which I wouldn't have my DMs open if I had 50 million followers, and bless you. But there's some people who have their DMs open, and I think it was Shuan Head who said, if you have a problem with me, just take it in private. But if you're going to quote tweet me, I'm going to quote tweet you back, and I don't care if what happens. I would try to take the approach where there's as little drama, as little controversy as possible. There are times, of course, there's exceptions to a lot of rules where you can throw that to the winds and say, forget it. If something matters to me, and I know this is something that's objectively important, then hey, hell, I'm gonna go public, and I don't care if you like it or not. Like, if let's say Owen was a doxer, I'd be like, screw it, I'm gonna expose him for being a doxer. Or if he was doing something really unethical, like there's no point in talking to it about with him, then yeah, I would definitely go public. But if it's something where I'm like, okay, I don't know the context of what you said, or you said something I didn't like, which I almost never ever have a problem with how someone says it. Usually it's not, I don't find it to be that big of a controversy. But I guess it's just going to be difference of opinion or different ways of handling it. But generally, I could be described to the mindset of I want to handle things to prevent it from blowing up. I wanted to something, if there's a problem, let's just deal with it right here, right now, so this doesn't drag on for a very long period of time. And even if we disagree at the end, at least we understand where we come from, and it's not going to be this like, what does he think, or what does that other person think?
Yeah, I think it's it's important to remember that with a lot of stuff, the things being discussed, they're being discussed because they're harmful, or they cause people stress and stuff, and they wouldn't be being discussed if that wasn't the case. So subsequently, sometimes I feel as though it's important to focus on that the conversation takes place because it's important to remind people that things harm people, and certainly that people need to be more considerate of what they're saying and doing, especially in the case of bigotry, because that does have a real world effect, as we're seeing right now with what Trump's doing regarding trans people,
or regarding whenever he opens his mouth about people. But I will say that in certain, I think everyone should have some element of caution when they're talking about something, whether they are familiar with it or not. Like, I do get rather impatient with people if they're trying to talk to me about mental health and they're not really careful, they're not. I'm not saying they have to they have to think about it for 10 minutes about what they want to say, but generally it's like instead of just saying, like, if they're trying to talk about it, they could ask questions. Like they try to at least sound like they know what they're talking about. Especially if it's of a sensitive issue, like whether it be trans people or mental health or any issues that really do affect people's lives. Um, to go about it so where it's like, oh, this person's not a malicious person, like they're genuinely interested. Um, Generally speaking, I think that the way you go about it, is another notable thing. It goes back to framing and things like that. Do you remember
Hmm.
what you wanted to say, or has it
No,
escaped your mind?
I'm having a bit of a mind blank. No. But yeah, no, it's important to like you said, it's good to speak, it's good to communicate, it's good to help people learn and go directly. However, there's a limit, there's a line, and sometimes
Oh yeah,
with some issues, sometimes it's okay to just say, right, this isn't acceptable. Let's speak about this. There are some things which clearly cross the line without needing to be explained. You know, um, and I think that's really the basis of what I would have to say. That some stuff
yeah,
is important to criticize.
yeah. I agree. I think that's going to be the basis of what I'm saying. There's certain things, and this could be just subjective. This could be objective. I mean, who knows in this crazy, crazy world? But like, there's some things that are worth going public with, and then there's some things that are completely not worth going public with. There are some things that are worth a 42-minute video and getting really upset at the end, and then there's times where it's not even worth one tweet. You know, uh, generally, I think that after, I don't know if it's me or what, but I think after like how this year's gone entirely with Twitter and YouTube, and kind of the things that we whether it be just you or just me or both of us somewhere in between, getting caught up in it, and I guess it just being a fatigue, kind of a short fuse, but just mostly fatigue, and you know wanting to not look back upon that and think, man, I did not handle it like I should have. I should not have um, gone about it this way. I could have gone about it a completely different way. I guess that in my case, I can only speak for myself in this hangout. That's just generally where I guess I'd be coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I have a slightly different view. I mean, I don't feel so much fatigued as more. I mean, I am tired of having to say some of the same things repeatedly, um, and I can empathize with the sort of exhaustion that has in terms of the stuff that's happened in some of our circles this year and the repetitive nature of a lot of the things. Then yeah, that stuff I can understand being exhausting. Um, Having said that, I feel as though it's important also to bear in mind that sometimes it's important to, be critical, be analytical, be, judgmental of people in a circles, especially when they are doing things which harm others, because it may be tiring sometimes. The benefit in the long run can be amazing. Imagine if we just put a bit more effort as a whole, not just like in our circles, but just in general for anyone. If every person spent a bit more time saying to each other, don't say that, that's not very good. Maybe we should work on this, trying to be better on the whole. Imagine what work that could do in terms of moving forward. Erasing and eliminating bigotry and stuff. And it takes a little
Mm.
bit from everyone for things to move forward. And that's sort of the focus I
Yeah.
have when when I ask people to be better, essentially.
No, I get that. I mean, in terms of like, if it's something where it's, I guess I can use another example with one of our friends who was getting, asked obscene questions in a stream. Uh, People had told me that they thought, this, we only talked about this for a week and then we dropped it, and people thought we had gone on about it too long. And it's like, No, enforcing just simple social rules that anyone can follow, really, if they actually try. Um, I can be patient with people, but when you clearly know what you're doing is wrong, then I lose patience. And you know, I get where you come from. Like, if it's something where it's like something that is hateful or it's obscene, or where it's like someone told you to stop. Like, if I was asking, obscene questions about Owen being black or whatever, and he's like, okay, that's crossing a line, stop it. Yeah, I'd be like, yeah, this guy, I wouldn't talk to him. He asks obscene questions. He's a rather strange guy. He is. I don't know what's his deal, but you know, I wouldn't want to spend any more than like a short elevator ride with that person would be agonizing. But then there's certain things where it's like, if someone just simply, like, if it's just something political, I'm just gonna drop it. Like I see certain things where it's like, the old me would have definitely gone in there, and I would have been, pulling a humane where I copy paste what they say, and it's like this long paragraph. And other times I just don't have energy. When it comes to defending my friends, and I don't care if people think I'm being petty about it. Like, if I see my friend is not being treated fairly, or even if I see my own friend making a mistake, where I think they made a massive blunder, if it's malicious, then I'll definitely go. I'll be on their case about it. If it's something where it's like that's not malicious, I'd say, okay, that was a mistake, but the intent behind what they have done, I would take into account as well. But no, I do sympathize with with wanting people to change, and with I will say, though, that I think at certain points it does come down to recognizing when they're not. Like, one person I had a few streams with who had some fascist sympathies, and he might disagree with that, but I think it's fairly objective that it's true. There's some people you got to realize are not going to change, no matter whether you publicly talk about them or you privately talk about them. There's certain people, and then they even might admit this themselves. No matter what you do, whether you take a strong approach, or you take a more succinct, but like, it's firm, but it's not like overwhelming response. They're not going to change. Like, then there's some people where it's like, it could be a genuine character flaw, and it's something they are really trying to work on. It is going to take some time and effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, some people who are making the effort to change, but it's hard. You can give them more leeway. You can say, oh, okay, well, let's just work on this maybe without the public criticism. But then I think that's a little bit different, because someone who's making the effort to change and learn, and is aware that they're doing something wrong, and just needs the helping hands to improvement. That's something good. That's something that shouldn't be shamed at all. That's something that's like, we want people to be doing that. If they're in a place where they're doing bad things, it's good to try and learn from them and to try and grow. And some people are going to say, oh, this person's doing bad things. But if you have the additional knowledge, then I can see why withholding on criticism would be important. Someone who's making the effort to change, that's good. However, some people don't, and I think some people, if someone's being openly hostile, then sometimes it's good just to say, right, well, let's use this as an example. And some people who refuse to change, that can be used as an example as well. And obviously, like, just saying over and over and over again that, oh yeah, this is an issue, can be a bit reductive. Sometimes it bears repeating. Sometimes it is good to maintain the the line and say to someone that, yeah, you're not gonna lose this label of bigot or racist or whatever while you're doing this thing. And obviously, if it's like every day, then yeah, that's the thing. But like, that's obviously not good. But if it's once in a while, then that's all right. You mentioned that when a certain person, when something happened regarding someone being made uncomfortable in the stream, and then it was spoken about for a week or so, and people saying it was a bit too long, they're a bit uncomfortable with it. Well, I would say that actually their discomfort is important, and it's good to feel uncomfortable about that sort of thing, because without that discomfort, without that, people need to be aware of bad things. People need to be, told quite clearly based on what actually happened in the particular incident I'm talking about. People need to, realize that bad things and harmful, bigoted harassment, things like that shouldn't be happening, and it's enabled by people being unwilling to speak out because they're too worried about looking bad or offsetting something. Sorry, what is that noise? Is that?
I hear it from your end.
Yeah, no, it does sound like it's from my end. I have no clue what it was. Probably a pipe or something.
I thought it was a ringtone. I was gonna be like, I don't know what ringtone that is, but interesting choice there.
It'd be a ringtone that made me not want to pick up my phone, to be honest.
No, I'd agree. Yeah, with discomfort, I mean, I guess you could use an interesting example. For me personally, I will set my alarm clock all the way to the door, and my bed is on the other side of the room, so I can't just hit snooze and go back to sleep. I actually have to get up, pick up the alarm, and turn it off and get ready to start my day. I think you could treat people the same way. I will say, though, that sometimes efforts can be focused better on other issues, like in that case where I talked to those people who said, "Oh, you went on too long about it," or "It's a mountain out of a molehill." You could probably give them a one-liner, and they're going to definitely know where you stand. Like, people who do kind of like what you're doing are the reason why certain circles are so, uninhabitable and toxic, and why certain types of groups on YouTube are a joke. And sometimes I will be perfectly blunt with it. If I think there's something that is important to me and people are just gonna spit on it and say that it's not a big deal, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Like defending a friend of mine, people are gonna call it trivial and petty to defend a friend when something like that, like the incident we're referencing happens. Yeah, I have no problem being blunt, more blunt than the marijuana that Canada just legalized. But um, I had to make at least one pun like that, or one reference like that. But I will say though that it does also show people's colors when they're saying the problem is with you for calling out someone for treating your friend like garbage, like whether they call you saying you're going to the left or you're being an SJW or something that is so like such a mouth breather thing to say. I mean, there's certain times where it's like this is a meme and that you cannot take this seriously. Like I don't take really many people seriously when they use the term SJW in 2018. Like I just cannot. Like or I mean, I try to reserve. Like I try to be very conscientious with times I use labels. Like if I'm calling someone a racist, I want to give them enough rope. This is probably the worst time to use this terminology. Enough rope to hang themselves. So where I with that one person, with what they're saying about women and LGBT, I would let him say enough to where I could definitely say he said this. There's no way you can say that is not sexist. There's no way you can say that is not homophobic or whatever. I mean, you go with that same strategy. Like to me, you calling someone the N-word is definitely racist. You can say I'm not racist by definition, but if you look up the N-word, imagine everyone's surprised when they see the word racist involved in that definition. I was told that, which I thought was hilarious.
It just it's baffling the sort of stuff people will come out with to defend their bigotry, and as is obvious to anyone and to them as well, it is bigoted and it shouldn't be tolerated. But like you said, sometimes it's good to give people benefit of the doubt, or even just the time to extend their bigotry to make it absolutely clear that they are bigots. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that it's important to certainly for my case, I like to give people time, maybe a second chance. I'm not going to post stuff straight away, but if it comes to the point where they've repeatedly done negative, bigoted stuff, then I don't feel uncomfortable or unfair talking about them in public and stuff. But with some stuff, even then, It's like if a person wants to say, if a person is experiences racist abuse, then who's to blame them for saying, right, that's not acceptable, let's post it straight away. Who's to blame them for giving them one chance? Because really some of the stuff is so obviously um bigoted, um that you don't need to, you shouldn't need to be told that, oh, this stuff is bad. um and it comes back to what we were saying earlier. Patience is different for everyone, and some people don't have, and don't really need to have the time to deal with these people. Bigots aren't owed anyone's time, and it's a testament to um some of us that we even have the patience to sort of sit and talk with these people. um
Mm,
I wouldn't
yeah.
really call it a negative or problem, to be honest, but people sometimes are quick to criticize bigots, because who wants bigots around? Who It's not good. There's no positive in having them around.
Yeah, like imagine if I had just a bunch of white nationalists in a circle of mine. I had a bunch of, people who were like loving the Confederate flag, who were loving all these things. Where it's like that, like perhaps half a century ago, or even a full century or so ago, that probably would not have been that would probably be very common. But by today's standards, it's like you should rather be hoping those type of people would, they would not be attracted to you, not in the sense of like a romantic attraction, but in the sense of, oh, this person's making dog whistles, which that on its own, that does get into some muddy territory. But with the issue of like who you hang out with, um, like if there's one person, um, if there's one person where they're like, if they're just saying a bunch of nuclear takes and some of it's like, bigoted, or you could at least make the great argument it's bigoted, you know, yeah, I say it's completely up to those people whether or not they want that person out. Um,
Mm.
or if you could leave entirely yourself if everyone's like comfortable with it. I was in a server where they were a Discord server. They're talking about white nationalism, but and I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm out. But yeah, um, that's pretty much what I had to say about Callout culture. At least with Owen here, I do have like two other people that I plan on talking to this about. One of them I think will be this Saturday, so y'all can tune in for that. Is there anything else you want to say, Owen? Or I'll check the chat. If you got anything else you want to add.
Well, but I think the chat's just mostly like Joe's nonsense, to be honest. Um,
Jesus, Joe, what is wrong with you? Like, Owen watches hentai. Well, if that's what you're into, I'm not going to judge.
gosh, it's just, I mean, to be honest, he's just sort of saying anything that, like, to. I'm not even sure, to be honest. Like, it's not really that coherent. It's like different topics every time. Um, but yeah, enough about Joe. What I was
Mhm.
gonna say was just to wrap up that public call outs, or just criticizing people in public. Sometimes obviously there's a time when you can extend more generosity to the people in general. You can extend the extra mile to people who maybe they're saying things that are problematic or harmful, but they don't know it, and they could be given a second chance. Um, but there is some stuff that it is better to to directly criticize. It's better to actually address in public. It's better to give um, an actual call out of sorts to, if you want to use that word. Um,
Mhm.
that's not to say that it's always the case that that's needed, but for some things it's important to criticize. Um, so when it comes to call out culture, if you were to use that term, I would say that you know the idea that people can be criticized in public for things they've said and done, that's important, because I think that it's important to hold people account to what they say. It's important to make sure that bigotry in general just isn't tolerated, and one way to do that is just to make sure that people won't stand for it as a as a gesture, as a solid stance. Um,
Mhm.
And yeah, sometimes it can be a bit too much. Sometimes it can be, there can be more effective ways, and sometimes it's better to either use a different medium or, turn your effort to just doing it in private. But yeah, at the same time, sometimes a more, direct approach is needed. So, you know,
Mhm.
I do agree with some of your points, and to be honest, we agree on most of the stuff regarding this topic, really. But
Yeah,
I
I'm
feel
pretty
as
sure.
though,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
just
there's probably a
something
few
we
nuance
need to,
points to be made.
yeah. We're just speaking over each other there. But the
Yeah.
other thing I was going to say was thank you for having me on, S-Man. It's always a pleasure.
Mhm. Yeah, and thank you to everyone who joined. If anyone else would like to talk to me about this to get their perspective on it, because the others I'd spoken to, their perspectives were a little different. Some absolutely abhorred it. The call out culture. Some which was mostly the point of view from them was they absolutely abhorred it, and then there were some people who would say, who like you, who would say it has its purposes, but sometimes it can be too much. So
Yeah.
thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a good night. It is like almost 1 in the morning in the United Kingdom. It's almost 6 o'clock in the United States. I'm gonna go have some dinner. You have a good night, and I hope to see you all back here next time. Good night.
Awesome.